reading your word, but we can also gain important lessons by studying it and trying to figure out how we can best apply the lessons that are being taught to us in our present situation today. Thank you for the assurance that you do cause all things to work together for good to those who are your people. And thank you for the evidence that you give to us for our faith in you. I pray that we will mutually encourage one another and that together we will gain new insights today. Bless us as we seek to become more Christ-like in the way in which we live each day. I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
We are in chapter 9 of the book of Esther and verse 12. The king said to Queen Esther, "The Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men and the 10 sons of Haman at the citadel of Susa. What then have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now what is your petition? It shall be granted you. And what is your further request? It shall also be done." Does the king take notice of the victory the Jews have experienced?
Yes.
Yes, he does. In fact, in that day, this was very important to a king to keep an accurate record of everybody that they had conquered. And so anyone that has been put to death, they're going to be the emperor's going to know about this. Number 2, does the king keep Esther informed of the results of the conflict between the Jews and the non-Jews? Yes, he does. Now, Esther has been informed by Mordecai on a number of occasions, but most of what goes on in the kingdom, she would not know, that the king may know, but Mordecai may not have learned. And so she's getting it from both sides now. Number 3, does the king sense that something else may need to be done to assure the safety of the Jews?
Yes. Yeah.
Apparently, and that's the reason he said, if you have any other request to make, why, please go on ahead and make it, because I'll be glad to grant it to you. Because he was really caught off guard, and I think this has been really a wake-up call to him, and he's determined that he's going to stay on top of this matter. Verse 13, then said Esther, "If it pleases the king, let tomorrow also be granted to the Jews who are in Susa to do according to the edict of today, and let Haman's 10 sons be hanged on the gallows." So does Esther respond to the king's willingness to take further action in defense of the Jews?
Yeah.
Yes, he does. Now, I think that the fact that she is prompting, or that she is urging another day of permission for this battle to go on, for the Jews to protect themselves from against any opposition, is because the situation in Susa itself, the big city, has not been fully resolved. And no doubt she has learned this from Mordecai, and thus learning from Mordecai that they need more time to get the job really done fully and completely locally. She then is able to make this further request. Now, is Esther being vindictive? Not at all. I think that she has thought this through, and she realizes precaution has to be exercised in what she does in making this request and making sure that we're not trying to have a get-even spirit or take revenge, but we just want to make sure that we get the job adequately completed. Question number 3, what purpose would be served by hanging Haman's 10 sons on the gallows?
Is it a sign that...
You're exactly right, and the whole community is going to see that. And so she wants that to be a matter of public display, so that anybody who may have had second thoughts about whatever position they are taking and what's happened in the city will see that, and they'll likely not forget that. There are a lot of things we might forget, but if you saw that, and particularly Haman, knowing that Haman had the popularity he did in the capital city and is once next to the emperor himself, that's going to make a lasting impression on the people. Verse 14, so the king commanded that it should be done so, and an edict was issued in Susa, and Haman's 10 sons were hanged. So, does the king keep his word to Esther? Yes, he does. Verse 15, the Jews who were in Susa assembled also on the 14th day of the month of Adar, and killed 300 men in Susa, but they did not lay their hands on the plunder. Now, is it likely that these 300 men were in a different section of the city?
Yes.
Yeah, this is conjecture, but I think it's very likely. Like I said, this is a big area, and they probably were putting most of their efforts forth in the part of the community where they had the most to be concerned about. But there was an area that they knew that they hadn't really handled adequately. Number 2, what is added in this verse for emphasis?
Did not the plunder.
Yeah. Would you say that that's being very admirable on the part of the Jews? Yeah, I think so. It always bothers me a little bit when people think that, well, when somebody else has great misfortune, this is my chance to really be selfish and take advantage of it. And I think that this is not the right thing to do. Well, anyhow, verse 16, now the rest of the Jews who were in the king's provinces assembled to defend their lives and rid themselves of their enemies, and kill 75,000 of those who hated them, but they did not lay their hands on the plunder. Now were the Jews defending themselves throughout the entire empire as they were in Susa?
Yes.
Yes, they certainly were. Now what is repeated again in this verse?
No plunder.
That's right. Verse 17. This was done on the 13th day of the month of Adar. On the 14th day they rested and made a day of feasting and rejoicing. Did it take longer in Susa than it did in the other places throughout the empire for the Jews to defend themselves?
Probably.
Yes, it did. It took an extra day. Now, in the rest of the empire, we're thinking about smaller areas. So if the Jews in a smaller area are going to destroy those who were attacking them, they're probably going to be able to take care of it in a day. But in this big city, it didn't happen that quickly. So this is going to create an interesting situation, because later on, as we read in this chapter, when they decide they're going to never forget this time that the Lord has sought fit to save his people. Yes?
Oh, go ahead, finish.
Oh, okay. What was I saying?
The celebration to celebrate.
Yeah, are they going to celebrate on one day or 2 days? And as we read further on in the chapter, we're going to find out, well, we'll celebrate both days. So if you're going to have a good celebration, let's just make it 2 days, and then we'll follow it up with a day of fasting. Yes?
I'm a little bit puzzled about the people. They got this edict saying that on such and such a day they could kill all the Jews.
Yes.
And then later on an edict came that said that the Jews could kill them. Now was everybody either for Jews or against Jews? So the Jews knew that on that day they better kill everybody around them?
Yes. Yes. The Jews knew that they would be totally exterminated. That was the first edict.
Okay.
And so if they're to be totally exterminated, and this is the law of the Medes and the Persians, that means everybody in the Persian Empire is under this edict. And it's part of their responsibility to do this. So potentially everybody is an enemy. However, on a very practical basis, supposing everybody in this community is by law told to do something, does that mean that everybody in this community is going to do it? Not necessarily. I don't think that mankind has changed much through the years. But they have to be assured at least that those who were going to obey the edict on that one day would be taken care of. And apparently in Susa, they realized they hadn't been able to cover the whole town. The Jews hadn't. And there was another section of town that they still were afraid of. And so it took the second day. Now, I don't understand all the details. Yes?
Why wouldn't they protect themselves anyway?
I understand what you're asking. I'm sure they would, but if they did try to protect themselves by breaking the law of the Persians, they themselves are going to die. And that was the whole purpose of the request of Queen Esther and Mordecai. We don't want all of us to die. And if this law that you've signed is fully carried out, the king's going to lose his queen. I mean, everybody's going to die. Otherwise, somebody in the Persian power system is going to suffer the consequences. Because if you don't carry out your orders, then you'll pay the penalty for it. So it was a real serious thing. And people had a long time to think about this. I don't know all the details, you know. It's what goes on in the minds of people that cause them to behave the way they behave.
Wouldn't it be like the Sikhs and the Sunnis, they all live in the same neighborhoods, but they all know who's who, and they kind of give each other a wide berth, but they're very wary, and they probably all have some way of protecting themselves hidden in their purse or their, you know, whatever. That's what I would assume.
The Jews would be a lot more apt to fight when they have permission to fight. When they don't, they're going to be more timid, and they're going to run and hide and try to protect their family, and then maybe try to protect themselves.
Yeah.
It's all supposition, isn't it?
Yeah, all supposition.
Good. Did I ask question number 1 on verse 17?
Yes, sir.
Okay, question verses 18 and 19. But the Jews who were in Susa assembled on the 13th and the 14th of the same month, and they rested on the 15th day and made it a day of feasting and rejoicing. Therefore the Jews of the rural areas who live in the rural towns make the 14th day of the month, Adar, a holiday for rejoicing and feasting, and send portions of food to one another. Now which day was celebrated in gratitude for their victory over those who sought to destroy the Jews. Well, when you read down to verse 21, and of course I keep reading ahead, I learned they end up using both days.
Oh.
So I'm asking a question that anticipates you've read on further. But I have, so I'm going to answer that for you. Let's read it now for ourselves. Verses 20 through 22. Mordecai recorded these events, and he sent letters to all the Jews who were in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, both near and far, obliging them to celebrate the 14th day of the month of Adar and the 15th day of the same month annually, because on those days the Jews rid themselves of their enemies, and it was a month which was turned for them from sorrow into gladness, from mourning into a holiday, that they should make them days of fasting or feasting and rejoicing and sending portions of food to one another and gifts to the poor. Now how does Mordecai's proclamation settle the issue of the correct day to celebrate the Feast of Purim?
Both of them together.
Both days, sure. So it's a 2-day holiday, not just a 1-day holiday. So you get 2 days off work, not just one. Number 2, how is a holiday to be celebrated?
Feasting.
That's right. This is a time of feasting, a time of rejoicing, and a time of sharing, particularly with those who are poor. So it was on this particular day that they would recall in the years that passed, as they look back to this day, they would tell the whole story again. They would read the book of Esther again. And whenever they came to the names of Esther and Mordecai in the public reading of this book, the people would shout, "Right on, hooray, good for him." They would cheer like they were at a sports event and their team was winning. Verse 23, thus the Jews undertook what they had started to do and what Mordecai had written to them. Were the Jews compliant with Mordecai's letter to all the Jews?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, they were. For Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the adversary of all the Jews, had schemed against the Jews to destroy them and cast pur, that is, the lot, to disturb them and destroy them. Now, does this verse explain how the word Purim was selected as the name of the feast?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, it was.
Interesting.
Because this is remembering the casting of the lot, and of course the casting of the lot was to determine which day this was actually going to take place on. And so it was, they're going to remember the day that they gained their freedom by being able to fight back against those who had been ordered originally to destroy the Jewish people. By the way, the word pur is not a Hebrew word. It is a Persian word, but it's a word here that the Hebrews had to put in writing, but it was not a word in their vocabulary. Just like I hear a lot of things that are identified by name in other countries today. I think, man, I've never heard of that before. And it's just a case of, well, our dictionaries have to be changed every so often, don't they? Because we keep adding new names to them, new words in our vocabulary. And anyhow, that's neither here nor there, but just a matter of interest. Verse 25, but when it came to the king's attention, he commanded by letter that his wicked scheme which he had devised against the Jews should return on his own head, and that he and his sons should be hanged on the gallows. Now, does this verse repeat what's already been written?
Yes.
Yes, it certainly does. Because Haman and his sons were executed, but they were actually executed 9 months apart. So it's later at the time that the sons were executed, but all of them were ultimately executed. Verse 26, therefore they call these days of Purim after the name of Pur, and because of the instructions in this letter, both what they had seen in this regard and what had happened to them. So why is this called Purim?
For the lots that were cast.
Yeah, this the very word itself is going to cause you to say, okay, what is the meaning of this particular holiday? I know this is a day we're going to have a lot of fun and we're going to eat a lot, we're going to share with others. But what makes this day so important? Don't we have holidays like that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we observe Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
What makes Christmas a special day? Well, for a lot of people, it's certainly different than what it was intended to be. But the very fact that the word Christ is used in the word helps us to remember what we are celebrating on that particular day. Then we have another holiday that is not necessarily a religious holiday, but I think it's a good one. That's Thanksgiving. But does not the word itself tell us why this day was set aside? To remind us that we have a lot to be thankful for, and therefore we ought to express our gratitude for it. Verse 27, the Jews established and made a custom for themselves and for the descendants and for all those who were allied themselves with them, so that they would not fail to celebrate these 2 days according to their regulation and according to the appointed time annually. Now, in this verse we read the phrase, who allied themselves with them. Who would that refer to?
Judaizers.
This would be proselytes. What's a proselyte? Somebody's not one of them, but they became one of them.
Oh, okay.
So I think I talked about this once before. A proselyte is somebody that you went over from some other belief or some other organization, they become a part of you. We call that being a proselyte.
Does that have to do with anything being laying flat? No, okay, never mind.
That's a different word.
Different
Yeah,
word.
I understand what you're asking. For what purpose did the Jews establish and make this a custom to observe Purim?
It was important to them.
It was important to them, that's right, because they realized that this event in history kept them alive as a people. And so they never wanted to forget this, and they wanted to celebrate in a very special way. And indeed, this would be a day for victorious celebration, and therefore they were feasting in doing so. So these days were to be remembered and celebrated throughout every generation, every family, every province, every city. These days of Purim were not to fail from among the Jews, or their memory fade from their descendants. Now, what's the impact of were not to fail from among the Jews? I think that it carries the same impact as the law of the Medes and Persians carried. What was the real strength of the law of the Medes and the Persians?
Can be changed.
Can't be changed.
Oh.
Going to be there. And I think the intent that what was true of the law of the Medes and Persians is now so true with what happened in the edict that Mordecai and Esther were responsible for putting together and sending out, which liberated the Jews because they were privileged to ward off or fight against those who had worked against them. Was this feast commanded by law?
Yes. Oop, wait a minute.
Well, certainly not God's law. And therefore, in the Bible, you're never going to read that this is a part of one of the feasts that God instructed them to observe. This is a man-made feast that is being celebrated. Now, apparently, it was considered very important to the Jewish people, even though it was not something that a prophet of God had indicated that God wills that you remember this particular day for this particular purpose. In reading Nehemiah and Ezra, we assume that this was continued to be the practice, and nothing was said to indicate that there's anything wrong with doing this, which I think is a suggestion of the fact that people are free, within parameters, of course, to do what they think is the right and appropriate thing to do, without God having to step in and say, you may or you may not. Many times God gives us principles to follow, and then we determine, does this come within the guidelines? Can we do this and be in the will of God to do it, even though God has not specified that we're actually to do this? Kind of like fasting. Fasting is not commanded of Christians. Do you think God is pleased when Christians fast? Oh, I think that He is. I think that God assumes that's going to happen. But what makes fasting such an important thing to the individual who's fasting, if they're doing it religiously?
Sacrifice. Nope.
Well, yeah, it does demand a certain sacrifice. But how can I fast and you know that my fasting is not really done for me religiously what it was intended to do?
You boast about it.
That's exactly right. And that's why the Lord says there are some things that are best kept to yourself. You do it because this is something between you and me, God is saying. And so fasting is something, not we go around saying, I hope you've noticed I've been fasting for 2 days. You know, now if you're doing it for reasons, for show purposes, that's all right, but don't expect God to honor you for that at all. I mean, that's just something you're doing for your own selfish reasons. But I think you understand the point that I'm trying to make here. Verse 29, then Queen Esther, daughter of Abihail, with Mordecai the Jew, wrote with full authority to confirm this second letter about Purim. Was a further word needed to clarify the observance of the Feast of Purim?
I guess so.
Apparently so. You know, it was a suggestion. Now it's going to be established as a custom. So if it wasn't assumed that this is applicable in the first letter, a second letter was written, and this would make it so. But this is still a letter. It's not an edict. So this is not something that they have to do. It's something they're privileged to do. And they just want them to be sure that there's nothing wrong if you have this kind of observance. And we're making that clear to you by saying it the second time. Oftentimes we repeat things to make it clear. Verse 30, he sent letters to all the Jews to the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus, namely, words of peace and truth. Do these letters encourage the people to live in peace and truth?
Yes.
That seems to be the primary emphasis in these last words of this verse, to emphasize how important it is now. Okay, we've lived under the threat of death, and we've been permitted to kill, but that's not to be the usual relationship we have with others. So they no longer have the right to put you to death. That day is gone. That was limited to one day when all this was to transpire. And now the day for us to defend ourselves is gone. So let bygones be bygones, and let's get along together. So this was the admonition for the Jews, to make sure that they do their part in living as they should.
Did you answer number 2 for verse 29?
Probably didn't.
Did I miss it?
You know, I probably missed it.
If this is the second letter, where is the first letter?
Yeah. Well, the first letter was the one that was mentioned back in verses 20 and 26. You know, sorry about that.
That's okay.
Thank you for reminding me. I just answered that question without asking the question. So, okay, so this is where I want to make sure that you understand that this is just another letter with the same information, but not an edict that's being given to them. Now I'm ready for verse 31, is that right?
Yes, sir.
To establish these days of Purim at their appointed times, just as Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther had established for them, and just as they had established for themselves and for their descendants with the instructions for their times of fasting and their lamentations. Now, is Esther authorizing a time of fasting in conjunction with the Feast of Purim?
Yes.
Sure sounds like it, with these instructions for their times of fasting. So even today, some of the Jews still observe fasting in their celebration of the Feast of Purim before the day of celebration itself. So they do this in anticipation of the celebration, and then they, after the fast, they really begin to feast. What is significant about the command of Esther?
She's the queen.
The thing that's significant about this, I think, is no other woman among God's people wrote with authority to confirm and establish a religious practice that continues to this very present day. It just never has been done, that we have any knowledge of. This is the only record of a woman among the people of God who had the authority to confirm and establish a religious practice that still stands today. Now, what is this book that is talked about here? Well, I wish I knew. It's written in the book. Whatever it is, I don't know. Could it be the book of Esther that we're studying? Could very well be. Maybe that's it. Was it a diary that Mordecai himself kept? Could very well be, but I do not know. We just know that it was recorded. Now, the final question is the question I ask at the end of each chapter, have been at least. What lessons may we learn from this particular chapter?
Power to the women.
Okay, I hadn't thought of that, but I'll buy that.
Just kidding.
I think that one of the lessons we learn, particularly from Haman, is does the evil or the mistake of one person many times affect the rest of the family? And it certainly did here. And sometimes a lot of innocent people suffer because of somebody's bad deed, and they may not have anticipated that happening, but what we do is going to have an effect upon other people, and sometimes we don't give that enough attention. We are so interested in what we want to do and what we think is all right for us to do. I think we learn also that there is a purpose for memorials and for celebrations, and I think it teaches that okay, if you're going to feast because you're rejoicing in what the Lord has done for you, would it not be appropriate to extend a helping hand on this occasion to people who are less fortunate than you? So on Christmas, what do we do that I think is an excellent practice?
Give gifts.
We give gifts, don't we? And what a joy it is, and churches are usually at the top of the list in this, of giving gifts to those who we know would not be able to have this if somebody were not thinking about them, sharing with them. So I think that this is true. Well, I think that giving to others, particularly the poor, is one of the best ways we can express our gratitude to God for all that He's done for us. Last chapter is extremely brief. This reminds me of a time when I was a child. I probably was junior high age, and we had a revival meeting, and we had a visiting speaker in for that week of preaching. And back in those days, they would try to encourage people in a lot of different ways. One of the ways that they wanted to encourage us during that week was to get all of us to read as much of the Bible as we would during that week. So they asked us to read and then come prepared to services each night to report how many books of the Bible we read. And they'd tally them up. And by the end of the week, the congregation had really read a lot of books of the Bible. But when you begin to listen to some of the people indicate how many books they've read, there's one boy that wasn't much older than I was. He usually read more than anybody else. So I went with him. I went to him one time. I said, "How is it you read so much?" He said, "I look for all the shortest books in the Bible." So I'm sure he looked at this chapter 10, he thought, that's going to be one of my chapters. And he looked at some of the Psalms.
Oh, yeah.
Well, some of the Psalms you can read almost in one breath.
Yeah.
You've got to read that. So he read, and I think, well, I've been reading some of the long ones too. I didn't get that far. All right, chapter 10. King Ahasuerus laid up a tribute on the land and on the coastlands of the sea. Now, what may be implied by the mention of a tribute?
Statue,
I think that he's being indicated, it's being indicated to him by Mordecai that the time has come that we need to rely upon our own people for the support of the kingdom and not from the plunder we get from conquering enemy nations. And so rather than relying upon plunder for wealth, let's just have a system of fair taxation. So I think this is an indication that we're going to start taxing the people, and the people then are going to share and share alike to finance the Persian Empire. Verse 2, and all the accomplishments of his authority and strength, and the full account of the greatness of Mordecai, to which the king advanced him, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Media and Persia? Does the author of this book challenge the reader to verify the book's accuracy?
Yeah.
Yes, he does. Now, can we do that?
No.
No, we cannot. We don't have that. And it'd be nice if we did, and maybe someday it'll be found. But to this day, I have not heard that it's been found. It's something that is just not there. But it was at that time. And I'm sure it was in existence long enough for anyone who wanted to have this documented, they could easily do that by looking at the book of Chronicles and the Kings of Media and Persia. But you must remember now that the Persian Empire is going to fall into the hands of whom? The Greeks.
yeah,
And they're going to fall in the hands of whom?
Romans.
The Romans, right. And Rome fell. So there's a lot that is lost with the changing of world empires and destruction of cities and the building of new cities. Verse 3. For Mordecai the Jew was second only to King Ahasuerus, and great among the Jews and in favor with his many kinsmen, one who sought the good of his people and one who spoke for the welfare of the whole nation. Now let's go back to the time of the patriarchs. What patriarch rose to a position of second in command, very similar to what this man rose to?
Joseph.
Joseph. I think there's a real parallel between Joseph and the way God allowed him through a series of circumstances to be next to the Pharaoh himself. And I think that though the name of God is not mentioned in this book, that God is all the way through this book, and through his providential leading and caring and providing, Mordecai has been brought to the kingdom for such a time as this, just as he had suggested that Esther had been brought for the same purpose. Number 2, did Mordecai use his position to promote selfish interests?
Nope.
No, he did not, and that is to his credit. What important truth is highlighted in the book of Esther?
God's will be done.
Yeah, God takes care of his people, and he has throughout history, and this is just another record of how God is able to do what seemed to be impossible along the way. But what is man's impossibility is God's opportunity. And God certainly has demonstrated that throughout all of history. I want to get into at least the beginning of our study of 1 Corinthians today, unless you have a question or comment you want to make further regarding the book of Esther.
In the beginning, you said you didn't like Esther or Mordecai. Why?
I said that I didn't like them.
Well,
Said they may not be that great.
Oh. My words come back to haunt me, don't they? Yeah, I think they're very ordinary people. I don't, you know, I don't remember what I said, but I don't know what to say.
Well, let me ask, why would you say they were ordinary people? I mean, I know what Esther did was already God's plan, but we don't always follow God's plan. And even though she was frightened and she may have been the one to die approaching the king, she still did it. So, and so by doing that, she ended up saving the Jews.
But by doing that, she had to violate the Jewish law. I mean, God has never allowed prostitution. And yet she did not try to keep herself from being a part of the king's harem. So I agree with everything you've just said. I guess it's just where we want to put the emphasis. And when I say ordinary people, I'm saying I don't think that they are superly talented or cut above everybody else. I think that God has used both of them probably in a way in which God intends to show that just because you may not have been born into the right family, or just because you grew up in poverty, or just because you grew up in ignorance, or just because you have a past that you're kind of ashamed of, does that mean that God can't make a change in your life? Does that mean that God can't use you? I think throughout the Bible, the thing that really impresses me is there's not anybody that God can't use. And He uses every one of us in our own way. So I agree with everything that you're saying. I'm just struggling to find what word would be the best way to express my thought here. As best I can recall what I might have said and what I probably meant in saying it, is I find it very interesting that there was nothing about Mordecai or Esther at the beginning of this book that would really cause me to believe that these are going to end up being great people to accomplish great things for the Lord. But it happened. It's kind of like, let me use the example of Paul. Don't you think that those who knew Paul in his early days were shocked when they found out he became a Christian?
Yeah.
And the radical change that took place in his life? I mean, here's a man that was filled with anger. And by his own admission, he says, I'm the chief of sinners. And his whole object was to destroy every Christian. And the sad part of it was, he really thought that this was God's will. And yet he was living in total, complete ignorance of the truth. And yet, a wonderful change took place in his life. So, Doris, the way I felt at the beginning of the book, I've been converted now that I finished the book, and I've changed my mind. And I think they're great people. So thank you. And I'm going to celebrate Purim from this day forward. Thanks to Doris. Okay.
Okay.
I love you people. You're wonderful.
No,
Yes.
I would just add, because I think I could kind of see where you were coming from when you said it in the beginning, was that they were kind of deceiving the king. I mean, they weren't saying who they were. They were Jews, and they were never coming out with the truth. So to me, that's where it began to show that they were hiding that.
Yeah.
Well, they were not perfect people, and God can work through
Right,
imperfect
and
people.
that's what in the end, that's what of course happened.
Thankfully,
Yes,
right?
right.
So
But I mean, I
encouraging
think
from the
that's-
Bible for me.
Yeah.
I just love all those imperfect people.
You can relate to them, right?